I was very clear that the person running against Hillary Clinton was not up to the job, that it was going to be chaotic, that the job of president is not a joke, and that it would cause problems. And to see citizens storming through the Capitol, it was surreal and it was frightening and deeply, deeply disappointing.
Former First Lady Michelle Obama sharing her thoughts on January 6th last night with Stephen Colbert. Her new book, The Light We Carry, is out today. In it, she speaks very bluntly about how she felt when former President Trump won the 2016 presidential election.
It shook me profoundly to hear the man who'd replaced my husband as president openly and unapologetically using ethnic slurs, making selfishness and hate somehow acceptable, refusing to condemn white supremacists or to support people demonstrating for racial justice. It shocked me to hear him speaking about differentness as if it were a threat. It felt like something more, something much uglier than a simple political defeat.
For perspective on that comment and more, let's bring in NPR's All Things Considered, Juana Summers. She sat down with Michelle Obama. And thank you so much for joining us this morning on what is a fascinating conversation, just to hear her speak out so candidly. And one thing I noticed from your conversation with her is the tone of this book is a lot different than the tone of the other book that people might be familiar with.
That's absolutely right. It is still partially a memoir. She peels back the layers, much like she does in her acclaimed book, Becoming, which came out back in 2018. But she told me that she intentionally wanted this book to be more practical, to offer people a guidebook, a roadmap of sorts, to chart a path out during difficult times. She told me that she wrote this book largely in isolation during the pandemic with only a close group of people by her side who were giving input. And it gave her a lot of time to look inward and think about what type of tools she could offer to the type of people across the country and around the world who constantly are writing her in, asking her for advice on how to solve some of the biggest problems that they're experiencing in their lives.
When I think of Michelle Obama, I think of bravery, and that's just like what comes to mind. But what I love is in this book, she opens up about when she was really scared and fearful, and when she almost let that fear stand in the way of history. Let's listen to that and get your thoughts on the other side. Here it is.
I think the most anxious I've ever been in my life was when Barack told me for the first time that he wanted to run for president of the United States. I found the prospect of it actually terrifying, and perhaps worse, as we carried on a conversation off and on over the course of a few weeks late in 2006. He made it clear that the decision was really up to me. It's strange to think that I could have altered the course of history with my fear, but I didn't. I said yes.
100% true.
I love it so much.
100% true.
What do you think?
I think it's something, it's such a, even though you're talking about someone who's a former first lady, it's just this really relatable sentiment for anyone who's been in a long-term relationship, anyone who's in a marriage, where in marriage you have to have those give and takes, those conversations. To hear her openly acknowledge that she was fearful of what this would mean for her family, her children, her career, how this would catapult their life is a really unique revelation. Then, of course, seeing the ways in which their family was examined and cross-examined and scrutinized during their 8 years in the White House and since, I thought it was a really telling moment to hear her open up and own that moment of intimidation.
Yeah. So, Juana, here's the interesting thing. You know, when I was telling Poppy that's 100% true, I was a local anchor in Chicago when Barack Obama was a state senator, and then he became senator, and then he ran for president. And I remember that this book, long story short, is the Michelle Obama that I know. Not that I'm like best friends with them, but I do know them. I used to introduce them at like chicken dinners as a local anchor, like, oh, you know, Barack and Michelle Obama and everybody. And so this was the Michelle Obama that Chicagoans knew, that the constituents knew. She didn't want him to run for president.
No.
She did not. And even she had a hard time actually running and being first lady. And so this is a book, look, Becoming was great. It was a great book. There's no shade to Michelle Obama. This is all praise for her. But this is the real book. This is what she really thinks. This is personal, and I think that this is actually more relatable to women, you know, who have careers and then have to sort of sometimes take a backseat to their husbands because they put their husbands' careers first, and exactly how she felt about Donald Trump and what he did to the country. This is it. You saw her face on Inauguration Day, and this book is a reflection of that.
I think that's absolutely right. And you heard her describe her family in this book as this hopeful and earnest Black family that believed in hard work, that catapulted into the White House. And then after 8 years of what she describes as progress and achieving and believing in those principles, for the country to, in her words, have repudiated what her family stand for, she expresses a great deal of vulnerability about what that was like for her, that self-questioning of, did we do enough? Were we enough? What does this say about us, that this is the turn the country makes? And she talks about that so incredibly openly. I have to say, she seems like someone who really wants to be a helper. She's providing tangible things that have worked for her. She talks about picking up those knitting needles and what that has meant for her and how that was something that offered her calm and steadiness in a moment of global instability. So I think it was a really interesting turn for her, and I'm excited to see what she has to say about it as she heads out on her book tour that starts today.
Yeah.
Did you think that watching, I don't know if you guys noticed, I watched him very closely on Inauguration Day when Donald Trump became president, when Donald Trump was inaugurated. And I could tell like the dynamic between her and her husband. He was like, we can get through this, we can get through this. And she was like, she didn't want to really be there. She was doing her duty, but she was not having, look at her face.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. In the book, she describes her husband as the greatest disrupting force of her life and talks about that counterbalance between the two of them. And I do remember watching their faces very closely on Inauguration Day from our studios just down the street from y'all here in D.C. and seeing the contrast and how they were approaching that, even though no words were said between the two of them. It was an incredibly powerful moment I don't think I'll forget.
Yep.
Juana Summers, I also loved what she said about the pandemic, and I think that was really relatable for people. The feeling that she felt being at home writing this book. Juana Summers, this is a great interview. Thank you so much for
Really
sharing
good.
more of it with us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.